Oggetti socievoli.
Oggetti socievoli presenta
A Conversation With is hosted by Prisca Arosio.
My name is Guillermo Brambilla. I'm a product designer. I mainly design objects, furniture, but also installations. My work normally starts from materials and from the processes which transform them into objects. And I'm very interested into the narrative power of objects and the way we can imprint memories and images into objects. I also strongly believe in the importance of traditions. We do need to design new objects in order to adapt old traditions to new habits and new rituals. Right now I'm based in Italy, but I studied in Italy, in Denmark, a bit in Sweden. In the last years, I lived in London and then in the past year in Seoul.
The book that we made and the project we did was about the home and the object and the interaction between the people and how this has changed during the isolation period. I wanted to start with talking about objects. What kind of value do you give to objects and how this has changed during the social isolation period?
First of all, I have quite a bad memory and I'm also a very nostalgic person. So since I was a child, for example, when I was traveling, I always wanted to buy an object that was helping me to remember a specific place or a specific memory of a place. So this has always been something very relevant for me, let's say. Since I started designing, this increased even more. I'm always very careful to objects around me. I'm curious, and so I'm also always looking for new inspirations, new references for my work. How objects can influence our habits and our actions, and also our way of interacting with other people. I think what really changed was my way of perceiving time and also my way of building rituals in my everyday life, which is something I actually noticed also from your book. Because many times people weren't really speaking about a specific object, but more about an action like cooking or speaking with other people. Of course, they were also mentioning the tools they were using, but the main focus was more on the actions themselves. And also for me, I think it was really important because in general, I'm always very anxious and always in a rush. I never really dedicate enough time to what I do, especially for myself maybe. So during lockdown, it was really helpful on one side, despite the situation was obviously, especially at the beginning, scary and crazy and uncertain. On the other side, it was also kind of nice to have an excuse to let it go and to just say, okay, I don't have to rush. I can enjoy cooking. I can take time to take care of my plants, to read a book. I believe objects can be quite powerful because we can really use them to impress some memories and some abstract feelings and images into them.
So you're talking a little bit about the emotional aspect that the object has.
I also find it very interesting, especially when we talk about domestic environments. I remember a few years ago while I was working on my master projects, I was reading this book by Daniel Miller called The Comfort of Things. He's a researcher, went around various houses in London, and he describes what's inside the houses and also the people that live in these apartments, and tries to make a comparison between the objects and the people living inside. And in many occasions, it was quite striking and interesting how similar the people were to the environment they created around themselves. And I honestly believe it's quite a real thing. And if you're a designer, probably you really are styling your space. I think even normal people do that because even unconsciously, but they obviously do a selection of the objects around themselves. Even without really wanting to do so, they are trying to show who they are through the objects around them. For me, if on one side is a way to display my aesthetics and my taste, on the other side, it's also part of my creative process because it's also a way to constantly create a loop between me and the environment around me and create a constant influence. Actually, a lot of times I was just picking broken bricks in the street around my house. For me, they were interesting and I was just picking them, cleaning them very well and leaving them somewhere in my room, waiting to get inspired by them. And it's quite nice to just have things that are around you, but it's not like an active influence, but it's more like a passive one. And one day suddenly you see that object that you picked up months before, and you look at it again and you get inspired for a new project, or you create new compositions with the objects around you, and that helps to push new ideas.
So do you think this period of social isolation for designers, at least that they make objects for the house, have changed their way of designing?
Definitely, it raised new questions and new problematics, new areas to investigate, especially like if you think about working from home, or like just the fact that we obviously spend way more time at home. So there are definitely new areas to investigate also for product designers, but also in terms of production, especially if you look at people that are more designer makers that maybe make their own things without outsourcing, let's say. In that case, these people really had to build with the materials and the tools they had available at the time. So I think there are a lot of interesting examples that came up in the last year. I definitely think that these times really push some people to completely abandon the real world and just stay in the digital one and make digital objects. I feel like it was going anyway in that direction. Maybe COVID just made the change faster somehow. Like people were also pushed more to share what they were doing, how they were working, because they of course had more time to document their work or like their everyday life as a designer, let's say. So maybe that was also a way to make people closer to the design world.
How were you living the house before, and how this has changed during the lockdown?
Definitely, I spent way more time in the house. At the time I was in London, I was working full time. So as I said before, it was nice to finally feel free to be at home and without feeling guilty that you were missing out something, some events or something to do. I think that was definitely liberating. I really tried to be more focused on myself and like more generous with myself.
What sociable objects means to you? What make you think?
If I think about sociable objects, I think about objects as a tool to communicate something. In many situations, an object can be a vector of emotions and memories. For me, it's always very important to try to imprint a narrative into the object. I also find it very interesting to try to tell what's behind the object and how it was made and who made it, where it was made, because if you don't really focus on the emotional content of the object and what it represents, it's not gonna really communicate anything to people when you show it to them if you're not telling them the story behind it.
Do you have in mind of what could be your sociable object?
Definitely the phone or the computer, because it was a mean of communication. My plants, I was taking care a lot of my plants. With living things, you have like an actual feedback. Also related to what I was saying before about like surrounding ourselves with valuable and important objects. I think objects are also powerful in a way that allows you to feel a sense of belonging. For example, in my situation where I spent the last years basically moving house and city and country every 2 years more or less, I always had a series of objects. So I had like few posters, postcards, a small plant, small vases, and a few other small things that I was always bringing with me. That was a kind of way to allow me to settle down a bit more easily in a new place, in a new environment, because through these objects, I was feeling more at home, even if I was in a completely new and stranger place.